All right, good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to Decree of Dominion podcast with your host, Diamond D Money 1996. Got a special episode for you guys today of the Decreeing Dominion Uncut series. We have Miss Tiara Nicole Riley out of Maryland. How are you?
Hello, hello, hello. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, of course. I'm excited.
And so, again, like I said, this is the third episode of the Decree Dominion Uncut series. If you're first time viewing, make sure you go back and check out the childhood trauma series to kind of understand a little bit of my story. Again, for the viewers out there, I am a domestic violence survivor as well. Little synopsis to my story. Biological father tried to take me and my mother's life when I was 14 years of age and had to uproot and move out of state and out of my hometown. And so go ahead and view that after viewing this to kind of get a synopsis and a full overview of my story. And so we'll kind of get started here. Like I said, for those of you viewing that are not familiar with the Decree and Dominion Uncut series, it's just a raw, unfiltered interview type style where we, like I said, just tell the story and provide awareness. And if you're viewing out there, I just want to let you know if you're a survivor or currently going through a domestic violence situation, that your voice matters, that you have a story to tell. Like I said, everybody's story is different and unique to them. There's no such thing as, I'm not a firm believer of, one person's trauma is more severe or better or worse than the others. We all have a story to tell. As humans, we all go through different things. And so, with that being said, I'll kind of let Tiara go ahead and tell a little bit about her background and where everything started.
Yeah, so I am a motivational speaker, a five-time published author, and I own a life coaching firm called Rethinking Me. I do a lot of different things, but my favorite title, I am Kayla's mama. So that is one of my favorite things to add to the list, and number one thing on the list of priorities. As it pertains to domestic violence, um, I did get out of a situation a couple of years ago, about a year and a half ago, and it was a situation where I didn't realize it was abuse in the moment. In like, I think a lot of times, and this is why I was excited to come share my story, is because a lot of times when we think of domestic violence, we think of black eyes, broken ribs, punch, kick, the like only we only think about the extremes. However, we often miss the fact that in most cases, abuse escalates to that point. They don't start off punching, kicking, breaking ribs, all of that. There's a lot of things that happen leading up to it. And if you miss those signs, you can end up in a situation longer than you should. And I personally believe that if a man will put his hands on a woman or a child, if given enough time, he will kill them. That is because abuse only escalates. Um, and that's just what I believe in that being the reality. I am grateful that I did open my eyes that the abuse was escalating in time to leave before it got worse. And in conversation with someone from his past, um, it did get worse. He has done worse to other people. So I'm grateful that I was able to leave the relationship and walk away before it did get worse. But it wasn't until after I left that I realized that it was abuse, and identifying that although he never punched, kicked, etc., he did push, he did shove, he did bite, he did intentionally cause harm. And the moment that caused me to leave was actually seeing him get aggressive with our 18-month-old daughter. And that was the moment where I was like, oh, I gotta go. Because if anybody knows me, they know I love that kid with my life. Um, And so we had an incident that he got physically, he like pushed and shoved me in front of our daughter, and it traumatized her. She was about a year old at the time. And I told him after that incident, like, I would not participate in traumatizing this little human. I won't. I won't witness it. I won't be around it. I won't tolerate it. I won't accept it. I won't know about it and do nothing about it. Period. 4 months later, and after that incident, my therapist challenged me to have an exit strategy, because I think she also was aware that abuse only escalates. It doesn't get better. There can be quiet periods. There can be moments of, bliss in between, but it never gets better. So he gave it back. He snatched it again, like snatched it like 4 times. Like, first of all, who takes kids from food from a baby? Like, who does that? Um, and then I get up, snatch the food from his hand, and give it back to her. And then I went to go remove her from his presence. And he had such a tight grip on her arm, I physically could not release her. And at this point, of course, she's screaming. Um, and so he finally lets her go. So I go sit back on the couch, and she's glued to my hip because she's terrified, obviously. And then so I'm sitting, she's standing right here. But of course, at 18 months, like, we're kind of like face to face at this point because I'm sitting down. And he literally, with her like right here, he literally screamed and yelled in my face about how I didn't deserve an engagement ring from him. Um, I don't get angry often. It's just not in my personality to get angry. But in that moment, I was going on. I just texted her and was like, "We need to stay with you for a couple of days." She said, "No problem." So I packed our bags, and then a couple of days later, when I came back, I told him I was done with the relationship and he had to move out. So.
Oppressors, when the oppressor comes to the realization that it's actually over, that's when, for my situation and my mom's situation, that's when it became almost fatal. So, I do commend you for being able to exit the relationship before it got to that point.
Right.
And that's the main point of what she's saying, you guys that are viewing the podcast, is that don't let it get to the fatality or near fatality point. I'm pretty sure, like I said, we're all human, but, you could ask my mom today, some of the different red flags that she saw, she probably would have left sooner,
Mhm.
maybe even after that first incident altogether,
Mhm.
and went ahead and filed for divorce and got it, out of there.
Yeah.
So you want to make sure that, domestic violence is a serious issue that's not talked about enough.
Yeah.
I know on social media nowadays we kind of see like the little funny memes of, oh, I got her location, or she can't have no friends, no male friends, or no friends of the opposite sex, or no friends that are a threat to the relationship that I deem as a threat to the relationship, or um, oh, he better do what I say, or he not getting none, or it could be just
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
manipulation techniques, if you
And
will.
that's the where it starts. It starts with isolation. It starts with manipulation. It starts with mental and financial abuse. It starts at that level, but that is also abuse, and that escalates into, now that I've isolated you from your friends and family, now that I've isolated you from financial independence, now that I've isolated, you know what I mean? I've convinced you that you're the problem, and saying things like, see what you made me do when I have a violent outburst. Like, those are the baseline tactics, right? And even though, I appreciate you saying, I'm glad you left as soon as you did, but even in my story, there are moments where I'm like, I should have left sooner than that. The first moment that I realized in hindsight that I should have left, I was 10 months pregnant with our daughter, and he got into this drunken rage. And I had miscarried twins 4 or 5 years before I had my daughter. And he was aware of that because we'd been friends for a very, very long time. And so this pregnancy in and of itself was scary because I've already lived through what it feels like to think you're having kids and it end up traumatically. But at 10 months pregnant, he got drunk, picked an argument with me about a conversation with my mother. I actually communicated this to his siblings, his older sister, and I was like, "Listen, I'm terrified of losing this pregnancy. He keeps putting me under this stress. We're arguing 3, 4 times a week for no reason other than he's drunk. Like, I can't do it." She said, "Okay, well, I'll talk to him." He went to her house either that night or like the next day or something like that, came back drunk, picked a fight. I'm like, and that was really disappointing for me as a woman. Like, I'm reaching out to you for help and support in this relationship with your brother, who you know has an anger problem, you know has a drinking problem, you know has had history of abuse, right? Like, and I'm asking you for help while even if you don't care about me, I'm pregnant with your niece, and you send him home drunk. Like, I would have respected it more had she texted me and be like, "Listen, y'all already had an issue this week. He's been drinking tonight. I'm gonna just let him sleep it off here." I would have respected that more. But instead, you sent him home drunk and he picked an argument. And it was to the point where I was genuinely afraid for my safety. And he was like standing over me while I'm sitting on the bed. Then, when I tried to leave the room, he would not allow me out of the room, out of the bedroom. And it was so terrifying that I literally that night slept in his son's bed and locked the door because I was like, I don't want him to have any act. Like, I didn't even go to the bathroom at night, which, if you've ever been pregnant, you know how hard it is to make it a whole night without having to use the bathroom. And this is 10 months pregnant. I refused to leave the room. I genuinely was afraid for my safety. And that day when he left for work, I packed my bag and I was going to go to a hotel. My mom just happened to call me. And she was like, "Well, don't get a hotel. Like, just come here. Just come here. It's fine." And I stayed there for about a week. And then I ended up going back in time to have our daughter. And in hindsight, I should have just never gone back. If there's ever a point where the father of my child makes me feel physically unsafe, particularly while I'm carrying his child, there should have been no world where I went back.
Awesome. I'm glad you said that. There's another thing. You just keep, hitting all these great points that throughout the episode we'll dive deep into. One of the things that you just said with your story, especially, being in an African American or the Black community, um, I talk about it often on the podcast here, is that um, I'll just synopsis this with a little bit of my story of. I just remember my grandmother, my dad's mom, and then my mom told me, after this, my situation happened when I was about 15. My dad, as a kid, used to run around, as a kid, you're always at your grandma's house, especially growing up in church, or you're always around family. He used to run around telling people that he was evil, just as even like a little 4 or 5 year old kid. And so, with that being said, my whole family include, obviously, especially my grandmother, his mother, and, you know, the whole family knew he was, had different mental issues or was kind of, not all the way there in regards to mental awareness. And, throughout his life, this situation happened when he was, like I said, I was 14. He was about 35, I believe, 36, when the situation happened with me and my mother. But one thing you said about, his sister sending him home drunk, kind of reminded me of family members. I just feel like, especially in the Black community, I'll speak from the Black community because I am, um, Black. Um, just especially growing up in church, I just feel like church as well as family just kind of enables the behavior. And I speak a lot on the podcast on um, you know right from wrong.
Hmm.
Especially if you're in church. And I just feel like as a whole community, regardless of family or blood ties in family, they're it's 2024. We all went through these generations and generations of generational curses and baggage and different things. I just want to challenge all the viewers, and I always challenge my viewers this, you know, as you're listening to, our different go back and forth on our stories and our experiences, I want you to look in the mirror and think about your own life. Maybe it's not you specifically. Maybe it's your family member. Maybe it's a best friend of yours or a classmate or a coworker that
Mhm.
has you might be on the outside looking in of
Mhm.
a specific domestic violence situation, but I just feel like especially being 2024, we have all these different resources, mental health
Mhm.
resources, therapists, counselors, psychiatrists. At some point, I'm speaking to the direct family members for a second, not necessarily to call you out, but at some point you have to take a stand.
Yeah,
Um,
and
and
hold them accountable.
and you have to hold, your family accountable if you're going to be associated with them.
Yeah,
Um,
and I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's an issue, particularly for Black men in the Black community. We do not tend to have a history of holding the Black men in our families who we know are abusers, who we know are predators. We do not hold them accountable as a general statement, right? Um, and I think that's unfair because at the end of the day, I was reaching out to his sisters. I was reaching out to his best friend, who is our child's godfather. I'm reaching out to them because I'm thinking you can hold them accountable, right? Like, I want him to do right. I had faith that he could, but I needed someone other than me to hold them accountable. And this, what I would get would I would be gaslit. Well, he loves you so much, and he's really trying. And I've never seen him try like this with anyone else. And he's really trying. He loves you, and he's working to get himself together. Where's the accountability with him, right? But the other piece of that story, or the other perspective that someone had to break down to me, that did allow me to extend a little bit of grace, was that because of his history with anger and drinking, there's a great chance that they are also his victims, right? One sister I know for a fact, she told me that he dislocated her arm over a spades game. And the family's response is, well, we don't play spades with him. Ha 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 ha. I'm like, wait, what? But even in that instance, she literally said to me, I didn't even go to the hospital because I didn't want to tell the police what happened. We in the Black community have a very terrible habit of protecting our abusers because we don't want, because of the history that Black men have with police, we are afraid to submit abusers and predators to the police. Like, that's what the police should be here for, right? But because she didn't want to tell the police what happened, she did not go get her broken arm fixed. Okay. So, and then I'm certain that there are others, not as extreme maybe, but other instances where he was abusive to them. So even the sister that I called who sent him home drunk, there was a moment before we moved in together, and he was like, "Yeah, I popped off on so and so, his that particular sister." And I said, well, "What were you arguing about?" He was like, "I don't even remember, but I was drunk." Do you see what I'm saying? So there are probably, so yes, she sent him home drunk, and there was no accountability in that. But also from the lens of, she's probably also been a subject of some form of abusive behavior. And, his sisters in general. So I try to give grace where I can, but it is a little disheartening when as a community we don't hold Black men accountable. And even in my story, I never had him arrested for abuse. I never filed any formal charges for the abuse. I never really held him accountable in an official capacity for the abuse. I know of another victim of his who never officially reported it. She just took it. And this is from her mouth, right? And then he told me about another girlfriend that he abused. And she kind of was like, we can make this work. We can figure it out. Like, we have to hold these men accountable for the behaviors. And unfortunately, accountability is like, we don't hold Black men accountable because of fear of what Black men in the system have experienced over the years. But at some point, enough has to be enough. And for me, I have decided that once he moved out of my house, which that was the first time in like 2.5 years that I felt safe at home. And I didn't even realize I didn't feel safe. But after he moved out, I was like, oh, I have not felt safe at home. Even to the point where, like, I enjoy a glass of wine every once in a while. I wouldn't even keep wine in the house. Someone would give me a bottle of wine and I'm like, oh, we can drink it now. Like, I never wanted, like, I'm tiptoeing on eggshells trying to avoid his triggers, right? Like, it's a lot to process. It's a lot to process. And this is actually one of the first times I have publicly discussed it, mainly because I just wanted to move on. I just wanted to move forward. I just wanted peace. Um, and even after the relationship dissolved and even after he moved out, there were still incidences where I'm like, bro, like, you're cyber stalking me, you're cyber bullying me. He, with my daughter in my arms, he shoved me out of his home with the door while I'm holding his child. Like, there is so much. And then even back to the financial manipulation. After we separated, he went 10 months without contributing a penny to our daughter's livelihood. And I only started receiving anything because the state of Maryland had to take it out of his paycheck. Literally. She was in daycare. He knew how much it cost. He felt exempt from contributing. So I said, okay, I'll go through the state to get it resolved. But it's just been so much that I've dealt with at the hands of someone that I thought was my best friend. I really thought this was my best friend.
Like I said, you continue to unravel a lot, and I definitely appreciate you continuing to share your experiences and your story. And I hope this. I forgot to preface this at the beginning of the episode, but I hope something said here today resonates with the viewers. I'm just I'm a people person. The reason why we bring content is not for monetary value. It's not for just to talk, just to say you have a podcast and talk. This is to spread light on issues and to uplift the community. And like I did say, I hope that every viewer knows that your voice matters, your story matters. And I just hope that something that is continued to be said here today resonates with the viewers and resonates. Like I said, prefaced a little bit ago, make sure you look in the mirror and, kind of reflect on your own life, um, and one of the key things that she has said here today is, continuing to say is, there's different steps, there's different parameters to abuse, to domestic violence. Domestic violence, like we've been saying all episode, is it's not just oh, he got a gun out or took a knife and killed the kid and the spouse, or and killed, or took his own life, or he ran him over with a car. It's not always the stuff you see on the news that makes the headline or that's on the Lifetime shows or the movies. It's the simple, like gaslighting, for example. You know, it's my fault, but I'm going to make it think it's your fault. So therefore you think it's your fault, even though it's the whole time it was my fault.
Yeah.
One thing she said is financial. That's one thing that um, is not, I don't think is even ever talked about, that financial, maybe you're out there, maybe you're in a marriage or in a relationship where, he's the breadwinner of the household, or not even the breadwinner, or maybe he controls all the bills under his name. And so I want to give some advice to the viewers. Um, I know we're in like the society where like we believe men should pay all the bills and pay everything. But even back then, just make sure you're intelligent with the one thing that people don't tell you about back then. Yeah, the men were the ones working and making all the money, but the woman, the wife, was the one paying the bill, actually paying the bills, making sure it's in both people's names, making sure the kids were fed, making sure
Yeah.
the child of school affairs were taken care of. So just make sure you have some kind of, while if he is the breadwinner, just make sure you have, the some logistical value, and make sure you're intelligent
And
with your approach.
even if it's the opposite, right? Like when the man is the or the abuser is the person who makes all the money, it is very easy to see how that control plays out, right? That wasn't even my situation. It was a situation where we're bringing home the same amount of money and I'm covering 90% of the bills and you're still crying broke. Like, how are you broke, friend? Like, I'm paying all the bills, you're borrowing money from me, and you're still broke. And it got to a point where I remember one conversation, I said, listen, you're broke if we split 50-50, and you're broke when I cover 90% of the bills. At this point, there's no point in both. You're determined to be broke. There's no point in both of us being broke. It doesn't benefit our child. So we're going to split these bills 50-50 and go on about our day. Um, but yeah, I mean, in thinking about like, it's not just physical abuse, there's also sexual abuse. And although there wasn't sexual, he didn't force me sexually, he would use sex as a manipulation tool, right? Like he would withhold sex, which a man withholding sex is really, it was a new experience for me. I didn't know that was a thing, honestly. But knowing that that was what I wanted, he would refuse flat out to have sex with me and then would go, do it on his own, basically, type situation. But then there's also the verbal, there's also the financial, there's also the psychological. Like, this is the same man who, on one hand, would be like, why wouldn't you tell me that you were feeling suicidal? And then the very next argument, throw it in my face. Well, what are you going to go kill yourself? Huh? Like, what do you mean? Why didn't I tell you I was having suicidal thoughts? If the very next argument, you're just going to tell me as if it's a punchline in your joke. Like, it's just, it's a lot. But I think it's responsible to also talk about like the stages of abuse and how there's a cycle. Because a lot of times we enter, so the four stages are tension building, the actual incident, reconciliation, and then the calm. And reconciliation does often come with like gifts and love bombing and things like that nature. And then there's this calm period, and then the tension builds back up, and then there's incident, and it just goes in a cycle. A lot of times when we're in stage 3 of reconciliation or love bombing or stage 4 in the calm, we're thinking it's okay. And I know that was my incident. Like, we went from arguing 3-4 times a week, then it was maybe a month or two, then it was a couple of months. And then what I realized towards the end of our relationship was the incidents were happening with longer, like there was longer periods of calm in between, but then the incidences would be bigger, right? Like, first it was yelling, then it was the physical intimidation while I'm pregnant with your child and locking me in the room, and then it became the pushing and shoving and biting, and like all like the moments became bigger even though the time period of calm was longer. So I want to say that even if that calm lasts months, years, you have to be mindful that at any given point, that tension can build back up and that violent incident can happen. Again, I would like to reiterate, if there is a human, specifically a man, if a man is comfortable hitting a woman or a child, if given enough time, he will kill them. There's no two ways about it. You either leave or he will kill you. That's it. There's no other way around it. No other way.
Awesome. You packed out a lot too. One thing I will say, I remember when I was in eighth grade, I actually had a counselor, and she basically described, what I was going through perfectly. She called it the volcano effect, where basically, I'm just a person that never, would never show emotion, never
That was
show
it.
anger, and so you compact, and like we've been saying, it's the small stuff. It's not somebody slapped me in the face and call me out of my name. It's like little stuff that, especially at that time, in middle school, like, people are familiar with different bullying, whether it be cyberbullying. Back then, like I said, in my childhood trauma series, I was a fat kid growing up. Obviously, I didn't work out and have muscles and play sports. So, it's just simple stuff like the girl you like in school, you having a crush on her, and back then we used to pass notes, her calling you fat. It could be simple stuff like that. That obviously looking back, it's like whatever. I'm obviously a grown man now, but at the time, it kind of just gets thrown in the volcano, like at the bottom, like just
And because
gets.
you're not processing it and actually dealing with it, that and for my ex, the thing that would erupt the volcano was alcohol, right? And so he would hold stuff in, hold stuff in, hold stuff in, hold stuff in, and then he would start drinking, and then the drinking would then help him explode whatever he was feeling. I'm like, if you just dealt with it on a level 1, maybe you wouldn't get to a level 10, right? But he refused to go to therapy. He refused to like actually deal with his problems, all of that. Because if you remember when I said about the incident about my daughter not saying thank you, the very chance he got, the first thing out of his mouth is, "And you think you deserve a ring?" Like, that's what you're really mad at. You're mad that we've been dating for multiple years and I'm not allowing you to just continue to date me. And I'm asking you, well, piss or get off the pot. Like, are we getting married or no? Right? After 2 years of dating and we done bought a house. Well, I bought a house for us, but we've been living together all this time. If I'm good enough to buy a house with, if I'm good enough to have a kid with, sure as fuck I'm good enough to be married, right? Like, you know what I mean? So, but we had that conversation probably like 3-4 weeks before that incident. But he had been bottling it up, not wanting to talk about it, not wanting to talk about it. And then now you've blown up at my daughter over something you're mad at me about. And that's the hard part. It's like when you don't have control over that volcano, you will erupt on whoever's in front of you. It doesn't matter what you're actually mad about. Whoever's in front of you is who's going to catch the raft of that. And unfortunately, I have witnessed him take that out on even children, like his own children that he claims is his number one priority in his life. And it's like, but you're yelling at your son because of what his mom did, like 7 years ago, by the way. Huh? Like, you can't convince me that your kids come first when you're yelling at an 18-month-old because the person you're in a relationship with is telling you to piss or get off the pot. You cannot convince me that your kids come first in your life. You just can't.
Right. And so I always say that, with mental health as well,
Yeah.
um, I think of us humans as, a tree. We plant the seed. Obviously, your mother gives birth and you grow up. And as you get older, you become the trees that we drive down past on the highway and down the street, big, strong trees. But I like to think of trauma and the volcano method as dead branches on a tree. And if
Mm-hmm.
you've ever seen a storm, especially if you live in the mountains, when a tree falls on a road, it blocks the road and you can't progress further. And that's,
Mm-hmm.
I always like to use that analogy um, when it comes to mental health. There's another quote, like I said, it's from Colin Coherd. He's a sports podcaster. I'm big into sports. Outside of podcasting, I'm a big Bears and Lakers fan, so hopefully LeBron wins that fifth ring this year. But he said one thing, it was 2 years ago. He said it on his sports podcast. He was talking about a specific player. He said, I want everybody to tune in on this. Is he said you take the worst thing somebody's done. He obviously was references sports, but I've referenced just life. Or just think about, if you're viewing out there, think about your relationship. And it doesn't have to be your romantic relationship. It could be your relationship with your parents. It could be your relationship with your siblings. It could be just any relationship. Take the best thing they've done for you, or the best thing they've done to you. Take the worst thing they've ever done, or the worst thing they've done to you. Cancel them both out. Everything they've done every day in between is who they are as a person. And so I'll say that again. You take the worst, the bare worst. You take the best, the height of the relationship. So for a relationship, um, maybe you got engaged. That might be the height. He bought you a $5,000 diamond ring. That might be the height of your relationship. Maybe the worst is he punched you in the face and gave you a broken nose. Take both of those out. If he's been abusive every day in between, then he's probably an abuser. So you have to look at that and just make sure that you're looking at the full scope. Don't just and then she said a lot with those 4 stages. When you're in that love bombing phase, don't just look at, all the gifts, all the taking out to the fancy dinners after he hits you. Well, if he, there's 7 days in a week. Most dates are on Friday, Saturday night. Well, if he doesn't beat you up Monday through Thursday, and then he takes you to dinner Friday night, and then Saturday, Sunday he beats you up again, and then takes you back to dinner the next Friday, he's probably, you know, just somebody that beats you up. Doesn't matter if he spends $300 on Friday night at Ruth Chris for the nice steak. You have to look at that as a viewer, and then also just on the overall holding things in. I just want to speak to the men that are viewing as well. Um, and I won't even speak on just the therapy part of things. Obviously, that's most important. But with your inner circle, when it comes to friends and people you associate with on a regular basis, find somebody that holds you accountable. Um, I have people in my circle. I have a good guy. He's older than, obviously, he's in his late 30s, so he's older than me. I'm only 27. But you want somebody in your circle. You want people, you want to build a circle of accountability partners. You want people that, and for me, it's my mom. Like I said, as you know, I'm obviously a mother's boy. But my mom, one thing she's done for me that I don't see a lot in today's society in regards to um, mothers my age that are, even when I'm just out with I have twin boys, they're 6 years old. Even if I'm just out at the store when I'm with my kids, one thing I don't see that my mom always still to this day does to me, she always holds me accountable. Hey, I've been noticing you doing this with the twins. Let's talk about it. This is you're not doing bad, but you could do better in this area in regard. This is the advice. This is my advisement for you in regards to how you're dealing with the twins' behavior, or if they're acting up in school. This is how I would approach it. Let's talk it out. Let me know what you think. Try this. If it doesn't work, let's come back to the table. I notice a lot, and it's not just mothers; it's also fathers as well. Um, your buddies going out to the club every weekend while your girls at home with the kids. Maybe once like you said, if that's your vice, maybe do it once, a month, or maybe once every few months, like just to hang out. But that shouldn't be an every week thing. And um, those guys that you're hanging out with,
Yep.
always say. So me personally, obviously, I'm single right now. Me and my twins' mom, we are great co-parenters, and we have joint custody. One of the things that obviously when you're searching for a wife, one thing I have in my corner is individuals that are in successful marriages. Like the guy I mentioned that's in his 30s, he's been married 20 years, since he was like 18. So I want to encourage the viewers, put people in your circle that have what you want. You know, um, Obviously, me personally, obviously, I'm 100% against domestic violence. Just being a survivor, so I would never have a bunch of abusers in my. As men, I would not have a bunch of abusers in my circle that I partake in festivities with, on a regular basis. Um, my mom's always said, "You're the company that you keep." Um, And so just make sure that, ladies, if you want a successful marriage, the women that you hang around with, if none of your, women that you hang out with are in successful relationships, not saying you can't have friends that aren't, put together, but, maybe the advice that you take from, maybe take it from, I always say seek higher counsel. Maybe you want to ask, if you're in church, ask the first lady, if her and pastor been married 30, 40 years, maybe you should, pick their mindset. Just, you don't have to, I always say, take everybody's advice or what they say with a grain of salt. You don't have to do everything you read in a book or everything you see on TikTok or social media. You know, take different key points that people say and then accumulate your own opinion and then assess from there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Agree.
And then another thing is just I do have a question.
Yeah.
Um, what was I know you've unpacked a lot with your support system. I want to kind of go back to your therapist.
Hmm.
Question for that, and I want the viewers to listen in. One, what made you first seek out getting a therapist? Because I think in our community, I know back in the day, it was like frowned upon.
Very
You
taboo.
just go to church and you pray and
Pray
then
about it.
shut
Yep.
up and pray.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
What motivated you to kind of get into seeking a professional therapist?
Yeah, so I have a history of mental health challenges. And I use the word mental health challenges because everyone has mental health, just like everyone has physical health, right? But everyone has mental health in some capacity. It's whether it's balanced, challenging, whatever. But I have dealt with depression my entire life. For the most part, I've had anxiety at different points in my life. I've experienced um, suicidal thoughts and attempts, and I actually attempted to take my life as early as 7 years old. I like to be honest about that because I think a lot of times, especially in the Black community, we presume that kids have no reason to be sad, and that's just not true. When we don't give space for children to be sad, that leaves them to resort to, and they are sad, that leads them to resort to other outlets, right? Some that can be deadly. Um, so I've always had challenges with mental health, but growing up in the Black church, you just pray about it and you move on. And it wasn't until I went to college, and I went to Virginia Tech, and I was going through a really difficult time. The irony in this entire story, I told you we've been friends for forever, right? This is the friend that told me to start going to therapy because he was concerned about my mental health. Literally, when we were in college, he was like, "You need to get with the therapist." And he is the person that single handedly prompted me to even explore the idea of therapy. It's laughable now because I'm so far removed from it, but it's just like the jokes write themselves at this point. Um, but at Virginia Tech, they did offer therapy. I want to say free, but it obviously built into the cost of attending the school and the fees and all that. So that is when I started therapy. Um, over the years. And then when I was pregnant with the twins in 2016 is when I started with the therapist I'm with now. And I started going to therapy because I knew with my history of depression, and for context, I was a psychology major in undergrad. So I graduated from Virginia Tech with a psych degree. So I'm aware of like the benefits and the challenges and like, all that. So because of my history with depression, I knew I was at a greater risk for postpartum depression. And just for clarity, I do get this question a lot. Just because you've had depression doesn't mean that you will have postpartum depression. And just because you've not had depression doesn't mean you won't have postpartum depression. It's just the likelihood increases because of my experience with depression. So I got into therapy the moment I realized I was pregnant with the twins. And I'm glad that I did because I ended up losing the twins in a very traumatic fashion. And so I was grateful to already have that therapeutic relationship working. But this is a therapist that I've been seeing on and off for years at this point. And I say on and off because I've moved out of the state in between the pregnancy and, well, in between the two pregnancies. Um, but I had been seeing her since we moved in together, which was after I moved back to Maryland. Um, and since finding out I was pregnant with our daughter, I have been in therapy either weekly or biweekly without fail. I have not gone more than 2 weeks without seeing my therapist since the moment I found out I was pregnant with my daughter. In large part, it was again my history with mental health challenges, but also wanting to heal so that I don't inadvertently bleed on my child. I wanted to heal from my pain, my trauma, all the things I've been through in my lifetime so that I don't then pass that on to her accidentally. So yes, I've been she'll be 3 soon. So we're talking I got pregnant July 2020. So 4 years that I have not been to therapy less than every 2 weeks for 4 years now.
Awesome, awesome. And then one other question with that, just with the, and then I want to do say, you're allowed to seek higher counsel. Don't think you're a weak person or you're not strong enough if you have professional guidance. You are allowed to seek higher counsel. Um, there's one quote when I had my marketing business: "Your net worth is determined by your network." And so, if you look at your Elon Musk, you look at your Jay Z's, your Simon Sinek's, your Mark Zuckerberg's, your Bill Gates, if you will, your Oprah's, anybody that's kind of at the top of their specific industry, they all have different people in their corners um, that are more knowledgeable in the roles that they are hired for, that they
Mhm, mhm.
partake within
Yeah,
that individual space.
yeah.
And so you want to, and that's with any, one thing that I'll just give you a good example. Was a football player, still work out and stuff. But I always wondered, Kobe Bryant's my favorite basketball player, but obviously LeBron James plays for the Lakers. And, early on in my childhood, just studying football and sports, I noticed that every football team has a training staff,
Mhm,
and every like high profile, every professional athlete has a personal trainer that they work out with in the off
mhm,
season.
mhm.
And I remember as a young boy, like 7, 8 years old, I was like, you're making millions of dollars playing sports. Why do you need a trainer? And it's because,
They wanna get
just because
better.
you're right, just because you're an athlete doesn't mean that you know it all. And
Yeah.
so, if you notice, like professional athletes, they have a nutritionist for their food. They
Yeah.
have a chiropractor, for the internal muscles and ligaments. They have personal trainers that focus on different body parts on how to optimize. They might have a cardio coach for
Mhm.
their cardiovascular health. They could have, therapists, maybe
And
a
I
pastor.
Yeah, and I do wanna say, so I grew up in the Black Christian church my whole life, right? I just wanna say, and I have a very active relationship with God, at this point. But I just wanna say I need Jesus and my therapist, and the two are not mutually exclusive. Like, my relationship with God helps me just as much as my relationship with my therapist does. And I think a lot of times, and I think we're getting away from that now, and with millennial pastors, coming up and things like that. But we have to stop thinking that if you just pray, you could just pray mental health challenges away. And I try to use this example, right? If you got into an accident and your bone was sticking out of your leg, in what world would you go say, I'm just going to pray about it and I'm going to go lay down? No, you're going to go to the hospital and you're going to let a doctor check you out and you're going to pray in the waiting room of the hospital, right? But a lot of times when it comes to mental health, I've gone through a breakup, I've lost my job, I've been in an abusive relationship, I've been through financial trauma. Whatever the injury is, we think we can just pray it away. And at the end of the day, it's almost more so we have to be intentional with our mind, oh, more than our body, because two reasons. One, the mind controls the body. And then two, if you are a Christian, you also understand that spiritual warfare is a thing. The quickest way to get you off of your game is through your mind. Like, the devil will attack your brain and he will use people, experiences, opportunity, like whatever he can get his hands on to take you out of the race. And yes, prayer works, but faith without works is dead. You got to pray about it and do something about it. There's not one miracle that I found in the Bible where the recipient didn't have to do something. Do your part. Pray about it and do your part. Get the help, use the resources. Who do you think created therapists? Surely not the devil. Like we have to be realistic when we're having these conversations, and sometimes we get too religious and we forget relationship. Just like you shouldn't be filing your own taxes, just like you shouldn't be representing yourself in court, just like you shouldn't be doing open heart surgery on yourself. Sometimes you need a professional to step in and help. Stop it. Stop it. I just needed to let that off my chest. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's actually a very good point that you made. Um, so, in your opinion, what do you think stops people from? Because when you look at it, every other part of our lives, our mental health is actually the most. To me, it's the most important part because it leads to everything. Like God created your mind. You know what you put in your mind is gonna contribute to your body. I speak a lot on just if you're viewing, think about just ailments. Like think about you wake up in the morning. Oh my God, my arm hurts. My shoulder is so sore. I
Mhm.
worked out too hard at the gym last night. You're gonna go through work. You're gonna get in the shower. You're gonna leave from work, drive from work, go through the whole day, and your
Mhm.
arm's gonna hurt. And you
Mhm.
might say, I'm going to book a doctor's appointment to check out
Mhm.
my arm. I'm going to go to med check. I'm going to go to urgent care. You go to
Mhm.
urgent care, you limping through urgent care, my shoulder, man, it's killing me. They do the x-ray. Nothing wrong with your shoulder. You just have maybe minor soreness, take ibuprofen, put some ice on it, have a good day. And
Mhm.
you're like, what? My
Mhm.
shoulder's been killing me all day.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
And
what that
sometimes
is,
you go and it's this big incident. They're like, actually, we need to take you to the hospital for surgery, right? Like, but I think that's true physically. Like if you randomly started bleeding and you did not know why, the first thing you're going to do is go to the doctor. If you randomly started crying and you didn't know why, what would be your response?
right, that's a good question because normally you just be like, you probably just lay down and cry and then just go about your day and then not even think of it. But to your other point, if I cut my, or think about kids.
Mhm.
Um, that's another important one. If your kid starts crying, you're just gonna, what's wrong? Give them some
You gotta find
candy,
an answer.
right?
Yeah.
And you're gonna try to give them some candy, or you know,
But not even just give them candy, but you wanna know what the problem is, right? Like, you
right,
wanna get to the root problem. You wanna dig as a parent who cares about your child, you wanna figure out, "Why is my child" like, my kid's 3 almost 3. If she randomly starts crying, I drop everything and I'm like, "Are you okay? What hurts? Where did what happened? Talk to me." As a parent, we problem solve. As a human, when I randomly start crying, am I giving myself the same due diligence?
right. Or do we just say, oh, it is what it is?
Yep.
And so you also have to think, on that note, just making sure, that, like I said, you're allowed to have professional counsel when it
Mhm.
comes to your mind. You should have the same, um, and everybody knows that person. And you, like I said, I'm not going to rant too long, but everybody knows that person. Me, like I said, I get physical health and physical fitness, but everybody, we all know that one person that's just, oh, I don't eat anything fat. I don't eat any snack cakes. I don't eat any ice cream. I go to the gym 5 days a week, but you're miserable. And
That
um,
part.
the thing you have to say about that is, like, I'm not disagreeing with, obviously take care of your, physical health, but you want to be balanced. You want to be as balanced as possible in all areas of your life. And so if your wife, is mad because you're never home because you're always at the gym, if your kids never see you because you're always working on your, physical intake,
Mhm.
then maybe you need to, like, yeah, you
Dial it
might have a nice, physical physique, but you might want to look at the other areas of your life.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Pastor Eric Thomas, he's a professional motivational speaker. I've been
Mhm.
listening to him since
I'm
I was in high
familiar,
school.
yeah.
Um, he says a lot about, like I say, he's been married for several years to his lovely wife. And he talks about it a lot in his different videos about, I want to make sure, yeah, I'm the best number one motivational speaker, but I want to be the best husband. I want to be the best father. And um, that's true with, all aspects of life. You want to make sure you take care of your mental health as much as physical,
Mm-hmm.
um,
If not more.
and definitely more. And so, and same
Yeah.
thing with like spiritual. Everybody's not all spiritual, but
Mm-hmm.
spirituality is directly tied to mind. So you
Mm-hmm.
have to make sure you're mentally aware as well as physically aware. You
Mm-hmm.
know, and like you said, there's one thing you said about the double attack of your mind.
Yeah.
Like I said, the mind controls all. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
That's where
and
it starts.
that's right. And one thing to think about that, let's just use physical. If I see a guy at the gym, I'll give you an example. If I see a guy at the gym bench pressing 500 pounds and I get to know him and he likes me as a person and he becomes my friend, what did I do? I gained a trust in his mind. It had nothing to do with him bench pressing 500 pounds. But
Mm-hmm.
if somebody run up on us, he gonna knock him out because in his mind, I'm his friend. So
Mm-hmm.
that's basically how psychology, psychology work. Not necessarily manipulation because we're friends, but that could lead to, and then manipulation is kind of where it starts in domestic violence.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
if you're viewing the podcast, um, make sure. I want to say one thing. Make sure you're allowed to have friends in a relationship.
Yeah.
You're allowed to have
That's a huge red flag if they don't want you to have either they outright say they don't want you to have friends or they inadvertently like every time you hang out with your friends it's like, well, why are you hanging out with them? Right? Like the just keep your eyes open.
right. And your partner is not. They should be your best friend, but they shouldn't be your only friend or your
Right.
only acquaintance or your only person in your circle. So just make sure you're diligent in your friendships, and then you
Mhm.
also want to make sure, like I mentioned earlier, to have the right friends.
Mhm. Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so, another question is that, with your life coaching career, um, not to interrupt any client privilege, but
Yeah,
um,
no, that's fine.
what do you feel is, what do you feel in today's society leads to the most kind of like negative impact of mental health issues?
What leads to the most negative impact for
Yeah, so
people?
yeah,
I
like
think
what?
I think what leads, and this is my in my humble opinion, I think the biggest negative impact to mental health, particularly in the Black community, is the fact that we are passing down generational trauma and not even talking about it. We are traumatizing the next generation of children and won't even name it. We just won't even name it. Um, Now, I'm not as far as a gentle parent where it's like, I don't pop my kid. But also, I don't start at step one yelling at my kid, right? Like popping her is usually step like 10. You know what I mean? After we didn't talk, we didn't explain, I didn't raise my tone a little bit, all those things. But I think there are some millennials that are going a little too far into the gentle parenting because they're not practicing accountability and creating structure because we're too busy trying to be kind. And I think you can hold kids accountable and you can create structure and still be loving and kind to your kids. Right. So I think that's going to be a problem. And I'm not even going to hold you. I am concerned for some of these kids that my daughter is growing up with. I'm like, who is raising these demons? Honestly, truthfully. So I think there is like we're swinging the pendulum a little too far sometimes, but I think for especially most millennials and Gen Zers, I think the biggest negative impact to our mental health is our parents, our grandparents, our cousins, our uncles, aunts. Like there's some family member in our family that is the biggest um source of trauma in our life and we won't have the conversation and say like it feels ungrateful to say, insert title here is my biggest source of trauma. But insert title here is my biggest source of trauma. Like we are in therapy working on dealing with people in our lives who refuse to go to therapy. Like at this point, I'm going to start invoicing people. Like if I have to pay my therapist and you were 90% of the conversation, I'm going to invoice you. Because why should I have to pay for it? You know what I mean? Like, and I think a lot of millennials are having that experience where we're fighting for mental and emotional well-being and actively trying to do better for our kids in the realm of mental and emotional well-being, while also processing and acknowledging that the generation that raised us is our biggest source of trauma, because they didn't deal with their trauma, because they didn't deal with their trauma, because they didn't deal with the, like we're passing down trauma, particularly in the Black community, and we can't even name it without coming across as ungrateful. And I
And
think a lot of millennials are, and the ungrateful piece comes in because Gen X tends to feel like, well, you had a roof over your head and you never wanted for anything. And I took care of your basic physical needs. And it's like, yes, you covered my physical needs. Yes, you covered my financial needs. And you went through great lengths to do that. And also, my mental and emotional needs were not met. And I should be able to be honest about that without you getting offended. But you get offended because your parents didn't take care of your mental and emotional needs, and their parents didn't take care of their and it's just this ongoing battle of trauma. And I think a lot of millennials are having the buck stops with me conversation when it comes to parenting and making sure, but that's a lot of work. That takes a lot of work to process what I've been through, process what I'm dealing with, and block it for the next generation. That is exhausting work. I'm in therapy every week processing one of those three narratives. It's exhausting.
that's a lot. Like I said, that's pretty. That's like a really deep conversation.
Yeah, we could talk about that for
Right.
hours.
One thing I want to say, and like I said, this will definitely segue into future episodes. Just for those of you that don't know, that are viewing the mental health series for Decree Dominion drops March 1st, along with this episode. So stay tuned for that. Um, but do you think one thing I think, um, and a lot of the, like I said, Gen Zers try to blame millennials and blame the newer generations. But to your point, I think it's been going on, from generations past. Is the sense of entitlement, um, like I call it the audacity, But the question I have that I want to address is that should you? I don't feel we should be rewarded for the bare minimum. Like, for example, I have twin boys. You have a daughter. It's our responsibility to
You better say
one.
it.
It's our responsibility to take care of our children mentally, physically, emotionally,
You better say
uh,
it.
financially. So, like, if you're
But
gonna, cause my stepdad always said. So, again, my mom was able to remarry happily. For those of you that haven't listened to my childhood trauma series, but he always tells me to this day, even though, like I said, me and the twins' mom are separated in joint custody, but he always said, obviously we're on good terms. We have joint custody, but he always said that, one, the children didn't ask to be here, and two, once
Mhm,
he said you two had all the time in the world to play
mhm,
games or, do whatever you
mhm,
wanted. So once you bring
mhm,
kids into the world, it's now your due
mhm.
diligence to care for
And
those kids.
I think that's the exact thing, right? I think if you look at age and stage of life where baby boomers, Gen Xers, and millennials have had their first child, that paints the picture, right? Like millennials have gotten all this flack about waiting to have kids, getting married later in life, all of these things. Whereas boomer or Gen Xers, maybe not as late as millennials, but not as early as boomers. And then boomers were having kids straight out of high school, getting married, having kids straight out of high school. And I think if you really dig deep into what that implies, millennials are starting their careers, they're enjoying their life, they are experiencing the world before having kids, right? And because of that, I don't resent sacrificing my life because I experienced life first. My 20s owe me nothing, nothing. I did everything I wanted to do in my 20s, except maybe travel. I didn't travel as much as I wanted to in my 20s, but I also don't feel like being a mother stops me from being able to travel, right? Because now I just travel with my kid. Like, we have a blast. The girl is a well traveled baby. She's before her third birthday, she's been to 5 countries. Well traveled baby. Okay. Like, we travel. But I think a lot, and then even just with my situation, right? Like, I had my first child at 29 and a half. My mother had her first child, which was me, at 21. When she got pregnant with me, she had to change schools. She went back home. She had to change careers. Like, and raising a human at 21, where you are just now becoming an adult and now you have to care for someone else, she spent her entire life caring for someone, right? My sister going to college was the first time she's ever lived alone, ever. And she was in her 50s before she has ever lived alone, right? But the challenge is, if you have not lived your life, you being a parent is a sacrificing role. It is. It just is. And if you have not done the things that you wanted to do for you first, resentment builds naturally, whether you realize it or not. And the unfortunate part is, as her oldest daughter, I felt the resentment. She never said it, she never verbally communicated it, but I felt the resentment. And in the comments about all the things that she missed, and well, I couldn't club when I was in college because I had to take care of a kid. How do you think that kid feels? But I didn't ask to be here. I didn't ask to be created, right? So I say that to say, one, therapy is just becoming a thing, right? We're a commonly accepted thing in our community. And so we're dealing with generational trauma being passed on and passed on and passed on and passed on. And also, when you think about age of first child as a general number, millennials are waiting later in life to start families. And that is resulting in our ability to be sacrificial without feeling the need to be rewarded. Because one, I've chosen to be a parent, not responded to it because I was out here having relations, right? Like, I made a choice to be a mother. My daughter was created on purpose. Like, I made a decision to go into motherhood. And I made that decision. I've already finished school. I've already finished my career. I've kind of got myself somewhat established. There were some things I had to do, just to get ready, but I don't feel like I missed anything. I don't feel like I gave up anything to be her mother. And that translates in how I interact with her.
Awesome, awesome. That's definitely deep. And then I just felt also it's also on the person. So like me, I had the twins. She had got pregnant when I was 20, but we had the twins when I was 21.
Mhm.
But in my situation, I remember, and it's the first time I've ever shared this publicly. I remember when I first found out I was having kids, when we found out we were having the twins. And I remember there was this one lady at work at the time. I was 21. She was maybe 25, 26. So not too much older than me. She had no kids. And I remember, and there was another guy that was older than her in his 30s, but didn't have kids either. And I remember them like having a whole like um, pity party, like, oh, your life's over. You're having kids early. And like for me personally, like,
That's rude, first of all.
yeah,
That's
that's
so
rude,
rude.
rude as hell. uh, but
But all right,
um,
go off.
but for me personally, honestly, um, obviously I started, my cooking business, D's Charismatic Cuisine. Obviously started my podcast earlier this year. Um, ran a marketing business for 2+ years. Um, so I would say, definitely like actually increased, like triple my salary from age
They're a great
18.
motivator. Kids are
Right.
a phenomenal motivator.
Right. So it's like, and then those people, I actually
Phenomenal.
ran into her, the same lady,
Mm,
like last year at the gas station, and she's still doing the same thing, still no kids, still in the same like
yeah,
job, same
yeah.
spot. And it's just like, I just think it's different for everybody.
It
Some
is.
people
It is.
can,
Yeah. And I'm
But
saying that from a general statement,
right,
right? Like that is clearly a generalization because there's exceptions to everything. But um I think it's really the heart posture too, right? Is it, oh my God, I'm having kids, I gotta get my life together, I gotta get this job, I gotta, or is it like, okay, I'm having kids now, let me get my life together, let me, like, we're saying the same things, but it's the heart posture. Do you view having kids at a young age as a burden? Yes or no? And the true answer is what's gonna seep through.
right. And then with that being said, because like I said, we both agree that you shouldn't be rewarded for bare minimum
Yeah.
mentality.
For putting
Um,
a roof over your kid's head. It's like,
right, you kind of
that's your
have to,
job.
or you go to jail, unless you give them for adoption. It's kind of called child
Kind of
neglect.
your job.
Says, yeah, there's laws for that.
What you signed up for having relations.
Right, and
Enjoy.
so and so with that being said, as a community, not necessarily just in a Black community, but just in general as a society, how do you think that we can kind of begin to mend that bridge, if you will?
Therapy. That's it. That's the response. Therapy. I think, and this is specific to the Black community because that's I don't, I'll leave that there. Um, if you were born Black in America, you need to be in therapy. That's my stance. If you are Black in America and you do not have a therapist, get one, and get one that looks like you by gender and race.
That's a good statement.
That's
I
all I
just
got.
think that that's yeah. Really say the mic drop, boom,
That's it. That's all I got. Listen,
boom. Yeah,
no other
You
answers
had the
needed.
Monique moment. Okay, I'm Club Shay Shay. No, no, yeah,
But no, like
the Cat
there's
Williams one.
nothing else I can elaborate on that. Go to therapy. Get you a therapist that looks like you, and go to see them regularly.
And so, how do you think that like some of the older generations? I remember I actually had one of the episodes for the podcast. I was talking to a pastor and an older gentleman. He actually admitted like, "Hey, it's the stuff that I went through. I see it in my son." So I've been going to therapy to make sure I don't pass it on. And he was basically saying, it ends here. And
Mm-hmm.
so, how do in your opinion, obviously we're both, you're early 30s, me
Don't
late
call me an
20s,
old
right?
millennial now. Don't call me an old millennial now. I
You
am.
still like
I'm
your prime. You
geriatric.
still, no, I'm
I'm a
saying you still,
geriatric millennial. It's okay. I own it. Go
and
ahead.
so, but how do you think some of the older Gen Zs, late 30s, early 40s, maybe early 50s. How do we get them to the therapy? Like, I know we're
So Gen X is who you're
right.
referencing. Gen
Yeah,
Z is younger than millennial, but yes. So millennials are technically Gen Y, technically. So XYZ. But how do we get Gen X to do what? I'm sorry.
yeah. How do we get the older generations to therapy? Like, because I'm not going there. Like, I'm just going to deal with it. Or
That's not my problem. It's kind of how I feel about it. I cannot. It's not my problem. There are adults in my life that adults. There are older members of my family who I know for sure need therapy. But I am not responsible for them. I am responsible for me and the child that I pushed out of my hoo ha. That's it.
and so, in your opinion, do you think just as a younger society, as we do our therapy and we overcome our things, you think they'll just? I feel like it's kind of like a rising tide scenario. Like, let's just say we have a family. Let's just say I got 20 people in our family, like just between my 35 and younger that
Mhm.
are, hey, we're going to therapy. We're talking this stuff out. Uncle Johnny, Uncle Martavius, all of them, like we forget them. We're going to do our therapy. We're going to talk our things out. We're going to overcome, heal, and we're going to come back to Uncle Johnny and say, hey, this is what happened. And I forgive you. I just feel, or
I
I've
think
overcame it. Do you think it'll like
I
they'll
think what I've learned in therapy is that therapy is not about anybody but me. I cannot control the behaviors of any other human walking this earth. Therapy is about learning how to deal with the other people that I'm interacting with, right? Learning how to process it for myself. I think I cannot want healing for you more than you want healing for you. I just can't. You're an adult, you're going to make your choices. What I can do is heal for myself, make sure I don't harm my child accidentally or on, or on purpose. But I think a lot of times it's accidentally. We don't think that we're hurting our kids, but we are. Particularly when you don't have commitment to processing your own harm, we start harming other people without realizing it. Um, so all I can do is heal my harm so I don't accidentally harm the next generation. Do my best to protect myself and her from the people in our lives, and set boundaries, express myself, keep myself safe. And that sounds very anti community. But at the end of the day, the choice that I have made for me is to be intentional about um, ensuring that my world is healthy and I am surrounded by people who are healthy and whole. That looks like romantically, that looks like friendships, but that also looks like family. And sometimes our biological families are our greatest source of pain. We're holding on because that's that's still your mom, that's still your dad, that's still your uncle, that's still your brother. Like, no, no. I don't need or want or deserve to be in relationships that chronically cause me pain. I do not care what the relationship is. Not my problem. If you refuse to do something about it, I can't force you. All I can do is protect myself and do my part to heal.
And you just keep dropping gems. Because, like, in my opinion, I feel like that goes back to what we were talking about, entitlement. If you didn't, it's kind of like, not in the same scenario, but imagine, let's look at an accountant, for a second. If you're an accountant, let's say that you're an accountant, like let's say you're a millionaire, and they're in charge of your millions of dollars in assets, and they cause you to go bankrupt. Are you gonna say, "Oh well, that's still my accountant"? Like, so if
No,
somebody comes, or like, let's say your
no.
doctor like messes up you have this important surgery come up, and he forgets to put an extra stitch in your stomach, and it bursts in the middle of you singing, and you got to get rushed to the hospital, and this different doctor saves your life. Are you gonna say, well, the other guy's still my doctor?
Absolutely
No.
not.
So, personally, I just feel like go back to that entitlement, like, just because you were, introduced to a certain role in my life doesn't mean that if you didn't do the, everything is, I use the name decree of dominion, because everything's decreed to you. But
Mm,
if you don't fulfill the expectation of what's decreed, you don't deserve the assets and the reciprocated results and benefits of, kind of look like LeBron James. His dad like disappeared, and his mom raised him single. And he became, most arguably the most prolific sports figure in
mm,
sports in general. He's not going around saying it's still my dad.
yeah.
Like, you have to earn. You don't really get to take just because you gave. God birth. We give birth, but God creates life.
Hmm.
So, you go into God that he's the one that placed the seed inside his mom.
Yeah.
So just because you're his dad, you don't get to, oh, well, I'm his dad. Like, because God could have made anybody his dad.
Hmm.
He
And
chose
I think
you.
that's part of the like trauma within the Black community is that whole, well, it's still your insert title. Like, this is how you have people who have been molested by family members sitting at the Thanksgiving table with their abuser. Like, huh? But that's still your, nah, nah. Respectfully, no. And I'm not saying that or even implying that that was my experience, but I do know people who have been forced to interact with family members that have caused them physical and sexual harm. Like, For me, mental harm is enough. Like, if you can cause me mental and emotional harm, I'm good on that. And I actually just had this conversation in therapy this week, and I was like, I think the true determinant on whether or not you are a good parent is when your child no longer needs you financially or to provide, or, when they're an adult child, do they want to be around you? That is the biggest determining factor of whether or not, in my opinion, you've done a good job. And even with my child being 3, obviously I'm a long way away from that marker. But even in these moments, like when she's sad, she looks for me. When she's happy, she looks for me. When she's scared, she looks for me. I have intentionally become her safe space in this world. Even when she's in trouble with me, she reaches for a hug from me. That at 3 years old is how I choose to interpret that I'm on the right track, right? Like, I'm not perfect. I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm processing my own shit. But I think being honest about, am I creating a safe space for the next generation? And we have to stop relying. It goes back to, like, when we think about like the definition between a boss and a leader, right? Like, a boss flexes his title to demand respect. A leader earns it. The same holds true with some of these titles in our families. Those titles expire when I become an adult. If I don't if you have not earned respect as insert title here, when I no longer need that title, do I still call you for advice? Do I still call you just to hang out? You know what I mean? Like, do I want to be around you, or am I around you out of obligation because it's the holidays? Or am I around you out of obligation just because insert title here, right? Like, we gotta start looking at the check the Carfax.
Right, definitely, definitely. And obviously, if you just look at the span of life, in our younger days, like we're kids, we have to depend on, our caretakers, family, who may it be. So, like, even to answer your question, like about like the abusers and stuff, like, and then I kind of want to challenge the older generation as well, that are viewing, that's your, if you're the matriarch, the tribal chief of the family, you know, that goes back to what we discussed early on in the episode is that, you know, when, it's 2024, when you gonna stand on business? When, you know,
And stop being the matriarch or patriarch only in title.
exactly. Like, are
Because if
you
you're the matriarch in the family and you're constantly at the center of the drama in your family, the problem is you. Like, the problem is
right,
you. Cut it out. Cut it out.
right. And then make sure you're, and then one thing we have to, like, it's 2024. Stop. Like I said, I don't really deal with this because, like I said, my family's out of town, so I kind of get to choose who I get to associate with, especially being grown with my own kids. But stop
Mhm.
forcing the. I just remember early on and like growing through church in my childhood. Stop forcing that awkward conversation with family members we don't mess with.
Mhm.
You don't have to, if especially if it's like serious, like sexual trauma or abuse. Don't even. Um, if you watch those John Wick movies, they call it the excommunicado. Like, hey, you did, this is the high table, this is the continental ground. You disobeyed the rules. You're out of the, like, you're out.
But I
So, like,
think even emotional intelligence is so important in that conversation, because even if you don't know that abuse has taken place, emotional intelligence says, like, for my kid, she is the friendliest kid in the world. The friendliest kid. So much so, I was like, how do I teach stranger danger? Because it did not come preloaded. Like, this kid runs up to anybody. So the second my kid doesn't want to engage with someone, I immediately do not. First of all, I'm not going to force it. I am under no circumstances forcing her to interact with any human walking this earth. I simply take note, because if she's super friendly and wants to engage with any and everybody walking this earth but you, I promise you, she's picking up on something I may not know. I don't know what it is. I don't know why it is, but I'm not forcing it. But and the unfortunate part is this is how abusers get away with their abuse because they know you're as the parent, you're gonna say, "Oh, go hug Uncle so and so," regardless of if I'm uncomfortable or not. If I'm saying I don't want to hug Uncle so and so, you're going to force me to do it because it's, quote, rude to not hug Uncle so and so. But your child may be communicating that Uncle so and so has been a little inappropriate or they're picking up on something that's making them uncomfortable. And what you're teaching your child is to ignore their feelings. You're teaching your child that your danger radar is going off, but you should ignore it because it's family. And family and very close friends are the most likely to abuse our children physically, mentally, emotionally, or sexually. But because they're literally alarms going off in their brains and in their bodies, and we are telling them, shh, I don't want to hear it. Go say hi. That's rude. Go give him a kiss. Go give him a stop it. We stop it. Cut the tape. Cut the tape. It's too much. It's whew. Yeah. Yep. 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 The kids are not all right.
Right. You
Uh,
want to make sure that, yeah, you just, like I said, don't force anything. And then,
yeah.
and then also, as you raise children, like I said, I'm still, the kids will be 7 this year. So, like I said, I'm not even halfway there.
Hmm.
But you also want to, when you raise kids, you want to raise, for me, like with boys, you want to raise warriors. You want to raise men that could stand on their own. And so, um, the danger radar is a natural survivor and natural warrior instinct. And when I say both, it means, um, you know, we as men, really it's men and women both, but I'll speak just because I don't have a girl, I have boys. Your My job as a father is to train them how to hunt. You know, that's like, and to hunt you have to have instincts. And then to your point, if Uncle Charlie, like I said, Caden like is the same way. He's the personality, me and him are the exact same. If Caden don't mess with you, I don't mess with you because he's
And I
like
don't have to know why. I promise you I
right.
don't. I
If
do not.
he right, because he's that, and he's one like he speaks his mind and he'll say what he wants when he
Yep.
wants.
Yep.
And if he looks at you, he's like, daddy, we
I'm
gone
like,
the other way. I don't even like it. You have a nice day, sir.
yeah, and that's it. And I'm like that even with family. And I think my fam like if and it comes and goes. Some like one day she might want to talk to you, one day she don't. Either both days, we're gonna respect it. But I'm really intentional about teaching my daughter autonomy with her body, right? In an organic way. Like I don't sit her down and be like, today we're gonna talk about what body parts you can and cannot touch. Like she's 3. Like we don't have those kind of conversations. But I do even as the human who carried, I am the only human walking this earth that can say this tiny human was inside of her body. And even with that reality, I ask her, can I have a hug? I ask her, can I have kisses? And I respect her yes or her no, right? Do you want cuddles? You want snuggles? You want sniffers? Whatever. And I never kiss her on the lips, ever, ever. Boundaries, right? Like we're learning autonomy. We're by me asking permission and respecting her no. I don't guilt trip her. If I say, can I have a hug? And she's like, no, thank you. I'm like, okay, whatever. Now, does that hurt? Yeah, because like that's my child. You know what I mean? Like that hurts my feelings. But I honor her ability to set that boundary. And if 2 minutes later she comes back and say, hug mommy, I'm like, cool. Now I get a hug. And I don't guilt trip her about coming back now, right? There was a family member when she saw this family member, she just for whatever reason just didn't want to like give him a hug. The next time she saw him, like a couple weeks later, he was like, "Oh, you didn't want to hug me last time." I said, "Are you holding a grudge with a 2-year-old?" And he said, "Yeah." I'm gonna let you sit with that because she doesn't even have long term memory yet. You're holding a grudge with a 2-year-old because she didn't give you a hug last time. Like today, she's running up excited to see you, and you stop her dead in her tracks about something that happened that she don't even remember. Like, grow up, grow up, like, grow up. I don't know, but we got to start respecting and giving kids the ability to make decisions with their bodies. And it starts with, can I have a hug? It starts with, can I have kisses? And, setting those boundaries in an organic way and respecting their no, because what we're doing is we're teaching our children that they have a right to say a no to adults, A. And B, we're teaching our children that your body, your choice. And so even if someone does try to harm you, they cannot convince you that this is okay because I've already trained you to know that it's not. I've already trained you to know that if someone says no, if you say no and someone requires or forces you to do something, at a minimum, I hope, at a minimum, I hope she knows enough to come tell me about it. That I've created a safe space for her to want to tell me about it. Right. And so it's about, and I have a friend who um, her older brother abused her sexually for years. And she had no idea it was wrong until she was older. No idea. For years. He was sexually abusing her for years. And he convinced her that this is how you show love for years. Right. And that is scary. Right. And I think we have to be cognizant as we're raising our children that doing things like forcing them to engage with people that they're uncomfortable engaging with is lowering their danger alarms. We are silencing their ability to identify danger.
You said something really deep towards the end about allowing children to let them know that they can say no to adults. And I kind of want to go back to that church
Yeah.
scenario. Growing up at church, I just remember the lady that cooks the food. Uh, all the ladies at church, give you kisses on the cheek and give you hugs. And, back then, we thought that was normal because, it's, church. But to your point, like I
And
said,
affection is normal. Hear me. Affection, even with adults and children, should be normal. It's unwanted affection. That's where we cross the line.
right. And
Right.
so, you
I'm sorry.
know, no, you're right. But like, if you want to, like I said, but if you're in church, if, like you have to have that emotional cognizance, like you said, if you're an adult and you go up to a kid and they're like pushing away or, like,
And then you
I don't
guilt
want,
trip them.
right.
That's where the problem lies. If you ask my kid, "Can I have a hug?" and she says no, that's the end of the conversation. It's not your place as a child. Well, why don't you want to hug me and give me a hug and none of that is appropriate because she said no. She said no. Cuz otherwise
Right.
what you're communicating to her is that any adult in her life has the ability to supersede or override her comfort level. That is a dangerous narrative. And that very narrative creates opportunity for predators. And I won't allow it personally. We not going down that road. I am not necessarily that I think something will happen, but I for damn sure won't let it be easy. I can't.
Right. And that's definitely so, kind of just to highlight some of the things we talked about. One, like I said, seek higher counsel, get you a therapist, your gender and your race that's relatable to you. Make sure you protect your children. Like I said, we have to uplift the
Mhm.
youth. You're allowed to seek therapy for yourself and to heal your own self.
Mhm. Mhm.
Make sure that, like I said, the mind becomes, is the matriarch of the body. So take care of your mental health.
Mhm.
Don't
Mhm.
let just physical, financial um, things deter you from focusing on your mental. And so, with that being said, can you let all the viewers know how they can find you or how they can reach you?
If they still want to. At this point, you might be sick of me, but no. I'm on all social media platforms at Tiara Nicole Riley. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, you name it, I am there. Also LinkedIn at Tiara Nicole Riley. Yeah. Um, I am also my business is on most social media platforms, so Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Rethinking Me LLC. So if you're interested in life coaching, definitely look us up. We are available. Yeah. Oh, and I have a YouTube channel, Tiara Nicole Riley. So pull up. Hey.
Well, awesome. Well, it's been a pleasure having you on Decree Dominion Uncut. Hope all the viewers glean something from this episode. Again, this episode will release March 1st, 2024. Um, in addition to alongside, if you will, the mental health series, episodes 1 and 2 will release on the same date. And so appreciate having everyone viewing today. Hope everyone has a wonderful, blessed Friday afternoon and evening. And we'll see you guys next time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being.